Welcome to Voices Against Violence, a Harmony House podcast to educate, empower, and serve as a voice for survivors. We aim to shed light on crucial issues surrounding domestic violence, offer support, and inspire action for change. Join us as we work together to create a community where all individuals can live a life free of abuse. Hi, welcome to Voices Against Violence. I'm Charity Jordan Rex, Prevention Program Manager at Harmony House.
Hi, I'm Kirstyn, Assistant Executive Director at Harmony House.
Today we're talking about DARVO, which stands for Deny, Attack, Reverse, Victim, and Offender, which is a really common element in the dynamic of domestic and sexual violence. I kind of can't believe that we haven't done an episode about this because it's so common.
It is so common. And in fact, I was thinking about the power and control wheel because aspects of DARVO are on the power and control wheel. And the power and control wheel we often reference in our podcast and community events and every educational curriculum we've ever done. They all center around power and control. Or the power and control wheel is a tool that we often use. And part of the toolkit has minimizing, denying, and blaming. That's the heart of DARVO.
So this episode, we're just going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into this dynamic. And I love that we're doing this because I feel like once people recognize that this is happening, you recognize that pattern, you're going to see it all over the place. And then I think it will be, it'll be harder for folks to try and gaslight you because you'll be like, no, I just saw that. You'll be able to recognize this in real time. And we'll also give some examples of what this looks like in real time and some real life scenarios.
And let's start there, Charity, because you already have said something like, we need to talk about that.
Yes.
So you said it'll be harder to gaslight you. So DARVO is a form of gaslighting, of emotional manipulation. Can we expand on what it means to gaslight someone?
So gaslighting actually comes from this term. They made a movie of it back in like the 30s or 40s.
Yeah, 40s.
Where a couple, like the husband was trying to make the wife think that she was crazy. And one of the things he would do was dim the lights. And I think they were like gas-powered lights. And so she would, see that the lights are dimming, but he would be like, no, what are you talking about? And actually he did a lot of things. I just started watching this movie. I'm only halfway through, so that's where the term gaslighting comes from. But it's the behavior, the practice of making someone second guess reality.
And it's totally language that's like part of our lexicon now. You hear it on social media posts and you hear it just kind of like, you just hear it more often than maybe you did a decade ago. And I just think that that's so interesting. And I'm curious, did you know that it came from a 1940s movie called Gaslighting? I don't know. Let us know in the chat. Let us know in the comments. Did you know that that's where this term came from? Or
have you seen that movie?
Have you seen the movie? Or did you just hear it on TikTok and you're like, hey, I know what that is now. You know what I mean? It's so interesting that how terms can kind of gain in popularity, and then we just start using them more and more. So DARVO. Don't let me get distracted by the movie.
So let's just kind of define what it is. So DARVO is a pattern of emotional manipulation where the person being held accountable, so the person causing the harm, denies the behavior, attacks the person raising the concern. And that's not necessarily physical, but they might verbally attack, cuss them out, things like that. And then reverse roles, claiming that they are the real victim. And so it leaves the person on the receiving end of that feeling confused, feeling questioning themselves, maybe off balance, or, maybe they just feel like, okay, I'm just going to shut up and I'm not going to say anything, which is the whole point. I mean, it's another approach that a perpetrator uses to manipulate and control someone else.
So Charity just gave us a rundown of kind of the effects of what happens when DARVO is in the mix. And this is researched. So the effects of it are researched. So psychologist Jennifer Fried initially named it in the 90s, this behavior of DARVO. And as recently as 2020, there were some psychologists doing research around DARVO strategies. And in their research, when DARVO was in the mix of different vignettes that they presented to their subjects were more likely to doubt the victim's credibility. So when Charity said, like, you know, the attacking is not necessarily physical, like it could be character, it could be credibility. When DARVO's in the mix in this 2020 research, they found that the subjects were more likely to doubt the victim's credibility. And in 2017, when studying DARVO, folks who experienced DARVO were more likely to blame themselves. And as Dr. Fried pointed out, which led to self-silencing, which is what Charity just described, right? The feeling confused, feeling like they misunderstood what was happening, and ultimately not speaking up because they were so, there was so much self-blame or confusion around the topic.
So one example that for me immediately comes to mind when I think of DARVO, and I think might help other folks understand what this looks like in real life. So if you're familiar with Gabby Petito's story, and they did a documentary about that story, which I think is on Netflix, but there is body cam footage from the police officers so that you can watch this play out, and it's wild. So for those who are unfamiliar, Gabby Petito was a young woman. Her and her boyfriend were on this road trip, Southwest U.S. But someone driving down the highway saw him striking her and called 911 and described their vehicle. So that bystander driving by in their vehicle called 911 because of what they saw. And so they get pulled over. And so the body cam footage captures, and I can't remember what the boyfriend's name is, but that's irrelevant, him speaking with the officers. And so he denies that, you know, they say, oh, well, someone called 911 because they said, you know, they saw you hitting Gabby. He denies doing that. And then he says, well, actually, she hit me. Right. And, you know, I think he makes some kind of comment about, like, sometimes she just gets in these moods and she's a little crazy. But, you know, I'm not mad at her. Like, you know, so he denies what he did. He attacks her character. So he makes the police think that she is maybe mentally unstable and claims that he is the victim because, oh, she hit me. And so you see the conversation the cops have with the boyfriend is like, one of them says to her, like, oh, you know, sounds like this maybe went both ways. Did you hit him back? And so, but we know that what she was experiencing was interpersonal violence, dating violence with this boyfriend. And he did end up killing her. But that is, and you can still go online and find that footage, but that is what DARVO looks like.
But it looks like in real time.
And I mean, that's an extreme example.
Sure. But it's a realistic example.
It's a realistic, yeah.
It happened.
Yeah.
And something that's really interesting too around DARVO is when the person will like flip it between the reverse the victim offender. Oftentimes what happens is the victim ends up apologizing and totally like taking responsibility for the situation.
Which you see in
the video with
do.
I remember that. I remember her saying, yeah, I did hit him, or, you know, or whatever she said. She said, yeah, you know, it was my fault. She something along those lines.
Yeah.
She took responsibility for the situation, which is not uncommon. So Charity talked about some about the effects of DARVO, which includes just the confusion and the self-blame. Something else to consider, though, is that when somebody is attacking your credibility or your character, it also leads to isolation. So it is an opportunity for that abusive person to really control the narrative around you to your friends, to your families, coworkers, leaving you feeling isolated and without a support system. Because if they can make it seem like you're the problem, you are overreacting, whatever the line is going to be, right? Then it will make it less likely that person's going to have access to support.
I think it's important for survivors to understand DARVO so that they can know in those moments that no, what you are seeing and thinking in this moment is correct. You're not going crazy. But I think it's just as important for everyone else to understand so that when you see this happening between a couple, or let's say you are a counselor or a therapist and you have that couple sitting in front of you.
Yeah.
if you see DARVO happening, that should be a huge kind of warning signal to you.
Or you see it happening in the headlines.
Yes.
So if somebody is, if something happens where someone is accused of some kind of misconduct or abusive behavior, and they start to attack the person's credibility and deny it and reverse it and saying, this is all a plot against me, or like they're trying to make me look bad, it should, cause some red flag. Look up, say, what's going on here? Is what I'm witnessing DARVO?
Mm-hmm. Another high profile person, Anna Kendrick, came out, I want to say a couple of years ago, as a survivor and talking about some abuse that she experienced. But she specifically, I don't think she used the term DARVO, but talked about how she was having an altercation with her abuser, and he's yelling at her, he's screaming, and she's crying, and she's just asking him, like, please stop yelling. And she talks about how he just suddenly shifts and like says, you're making me do this, and makes himself out to be the victim. Mm-hmm. And she talks about feeling like she just felt like she was going crazy in that moment. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this can be a really destructive thing to happen, like emotionally. And we can't underestimate the power of that emotional abuse.
Right. Because it is so emotionally traumatic to have to second guess everything you're experiencing, and somebody else whom you probably care for and care very deeply about is telling you you're wrong about it. That's a confusing and isolating experience. I want to just give some examples of what it sounds like when somebody is denying, and maybe like denying, attacking, and then reversing victim offender. So when someone's denying, they might refuse to acknowledge it as even happening, right? Like maybe that's what the denial sounds like. That didn't happen. You're making that up, right? Like just plainly saying, no, actually it didn't happen. Or they might be minimizing it. I was joking. You're making too big, you're making too much out of this. And then to pair it with attacking, right? You're making too much out of this, like you always do. You're so sensitive, right? So that's what it would sound like for somebody to deny and attack.
Mm-hmm. Another example. So, I did not yell at you. So maybe if someone's yelling and you're like, can you stop yelling at me? Mm-hmm. I didn't yell at you. Right. That's the denial.
Right.
You're always making things up to make me look bad. That's the attack. You are always doing this to me. And then the reverse victim and offender, stop. And so this person said, I didn't yell at you. You're always making me look bad. And the reverse victim and offender, stop blaming me for everything and playing the victim. So because, they're saying that you're always blaming them, that makes them the victim. Right. And so it's so important to recognize this pattern, because once you recognize it, if you are the person experiencing this, you can respond differently and maybe be able to not react, but kind of maybe you can emotionally, mentally step back and observe and respond.
Which is hard to do.
It is hard to do.
When you're in the thick of experiencing this. Oftentimes what we hear is folks aren't able to really identify this as DARVO until they are further away emotionally from the situation. And then they're able to see the patterns. Interestingly, when researching DARVO too, there are different areas of research that exist around DARVO, one with intimate partner violence, but also there's a growing field of research with DARVO in workplaces. So that would be an interesting kind of perspective on this too. And then also DARVO within structural systems. So what does this look like in our legal process, in our judicial process, when we reverse victim and offender? So just keep that in mind too. Yes, we're talking about interpersonal within intimate partner violence, but we're also, DARVO can refer to a broader societal scope as well.
That's a good point, because when we talk about domestic violence, it's about power and control, and that power and control dynamic can exist outside of a romantic relationship. So here's some other examples of DARVO and how they show up in other types of relationships. So let's say you are co-parenting and you're texting between you and the co-parent. So you send a text that says, please try to be on time for school pickup. It's been late a few times this month. And here's their response. So, wow, seriously? That's the denial. Maybe if you weren't always trying to control everything, that's an attack. I'm doing my best and you just keep criticizing me. Reverse victim and offender. This site I'm looking at, they have an example in the workplace through an email. So you send an email. I noticed the report deadline was missed. Can you please let me know what happened? And you get an email back. There's no need to accuse me. I've had a lot on my plate. You never ask anyone else these things. I feel really singled out. So again, once you recognize that pattern of the denial, the attack, and then them reversing the victim and offender, you're going to see this show up in other places.
Right. So I think maybe one of the examples of denying victim and, reversing victim and offender that I see it the most often. I don't know why, but just it draws my attention the most often is the line of like, well, I guess I don't do anything right. I guess I'm just the worst fill in the blank here, right? Whether it's like employee or, partner or whatever it might be, right? I guess no, that's actually not at all what I said. I just said, don't speak to me that way, right?
Yes.
And then instead it turns into, well, now I'm in a position where the victim's in a position where I'm having to make you feel better about the interaction that I brought to you in the first place as being inappropriate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's that reverse.
Yeah. So this website, which is a website based out of Australia, whose information and research on domestic violence is just on point. Key warning signs of DARVO. So just some things to think about to help you identify, is this DARVO? Is that what is happening in this situation? You raise a legitimate issue or boundary with another person, and the response back to you, it includes denial or minimizing, which, you're making much too big a deal of this. Oh, you're being so sensitive, or blame shifting. You're suddenly then you find yourself suddenly defending your tones, motives, or actions. The other person casts themselves as the hurt party, and you end up feeling confused, guilty, or silenced. I think we have all had an interaction like that.
Sure.
Even if we have not experienced some form of domestic violence, we've all had that interaction. And if you had that interaction, that's DARVO.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the idea that these happen not just within personal relationships, but also structurally. There was an article titled like "You've been DARVO'd and you don't know it" out of Stanford, and it kind of went through like some headlines of when we see people in positions of power shift blame away when it comes to accusations. That's DARVO, right? That's the pattern of DARVO.
Yes. I think about some high profile cases involving sexual violence, sexual assault, and judges and some of those cases made statements like, we don't want this man's reputation and his livelihood to be harmed. He's a victim too in all of this. So, this does take place on larger scales. It takes place in our justice system.
So when it comes to responding to DARVO, I just want to be really careful and clear, because some of the research that I saw around responding to DARVO said things like, keep a record of what happened. And so that, you can rely on that record when you are having to bring forward this, complaint or address this behavior that you're trying to address. It just that it might help to have a written record of something. And I just want to be really clear. Always take into account your own safety. Like, your situation best. So if we are talking about a situation where you're experiencing DARVO in terms of a domestic violence situation, please work with an advocate, work on safety planning, figure out the situation is best for you. If it's not necessarily a domestic violence situation, and maybe it is like workplace, right? And that's the kind of scenario we're talking about. That was one of the tips of keeping a written record so that you could rely back on that and say, no, I wrote it down. This is what happened on April 15th, whatever it might be.
I think that's a really smart thing to do, is to document what's happening. Another thing that you can do, and some things to keep in mind when you are on the receiving end of DARVO, is to, once you recognize that pattern, just take a moment, pause, take a deep breath, and ground yourself in that moment. So what the other person is trying to do is to get a rise out of you. They are trying to manipulate you. So if you are able to, and it's hard to do so, but if you're able to just take a moment,
regulate,
and ground yourself and not react, not rise to that.
Yeah. And not get pulled into whatever attack it is, right? So if they say you always do this, not shifting to having that conversation of, no, I don't always do this, but rather just staying on message of, this incident hurt my feelings or crossed a boundary, or whatever the fill in the blank of what you're talking about with that person.
I think another important key here is remembering, that it's not about you. So, you brought up a legitimate concern or a boundary, and you have a right to communicate that. And so it can be hard in the moment, but if you can try and remember that it is not your fault, you're not responsible for that other person's behavior, and what you saw, what is happening is true. Don't let them second guess your reality.
And surrounding yourself with folks who remind you that you have the right to be respected.
Yes.
You have the right to have your boundaries respected. You have the right to communicate when your boundaries haven't been respected. And like you said, not allowing somebody to rewrite your experience or memory of the situation.
And that can be hard. I feel like this is something that you kind of have to practice a little bit. I mean, you don't want to experience DARVO, but maybe something to remember even after the fact,
right?
Because those incidents can stay with you for a while. And if you can just remember that it's not your fault,
and that it was purposeful.
It was purposeful.
It's a tactic that people use to manipulate. And so it's purposeful. It's not your fault. And, yeah. Well, Charity, I'm glad that we talked about DARVO. I am surprised it took us so long. This is a really common thing that happens.
It is. But I'm glad that we finally talked about it. And, knowledge is power. And as we always say, an educated community
is a safer community. Thanks for joining us for Voices Against Violence.
All individuals have a right to a life free of abuse. If you or someone you know needs help, please call our 24-hour hotline, 417-864-SAFE, 417-864-7233, or chat 24/7 with an advocate on our website at myharmonyhouse.org. Visit our website or follow us on our socials to stay up on the latest news and events. This is Voices Against Violence. Thanks for listening.